Welcome to the manufacturer's product formulation statement. Is it acceptable? In-depth. Upon the conclusion of this in-depth session, the PFS information is relevant to sponsors operating. Before we begin explaining creditable ingredients are foods or ingredients that all CMP meal patterns require. Now we will move forward and define what a PFS is and what it does. As we stated in the previous slides, sponsors are. So how do you know when you need to request a PFS from a manufacturer? Follow this simple flowchart to determine if a sponsor will need a PFS. If a sponsor is interested in purchasing a processed combination food product, they often want to be sure that the product will contribute to the meal pattern requirements. The first step is to check to see if the product has a child nutrition label. A CN label is a product label which contains a statement that clearly identifies the contribution that product makes towards the CN meal pattern requirements. For more information on CN labels, please visit the resource slide at the end of this presentation. If the sponsor has the original CN label from the package, that is accepted as documentation of how the food item contributes to the meal pattern requirements. If they do not have the original CN label, if the sponsor has a photocopy or photograph of the original CN label from the package, that is accepted as documentation of how the food item contributes to the meal pattern requirements. If they do not have a photocopy or photograph of the original CN label, they can have a watermarked CN label, either hard copy or electronic copy, and a bill of lading, often called an invoice. Then that is accepted as documentation of how the food item contributes to the meal pattern requirements. So if they do not have a watermarked CN label along with the bill of lading, then they will need to request a PFS from the manufacturer before they purchase the product so they can determine how the food item will contribute to the meal pattern requirements. As a reminder, here are the main differences. What does a PFS look like? A PFS. When requesting a PFS from the USDA has developed a PFS form for bread grains. Here's an example of a PFS showing the crediting information using gram. Now that you have seen the brief, the product name on the PFS should match or have a similar description as the name indicates. In this next example, the name on the label states early. The PFS must include a product code. The product code is a PFS must include the serving size or portion size. A key piece of information to include on a PFS. The creditable ingredient listed on the PFS. Now let's review two examples on how as we continue our discussion on creditable ingredients. This is an example of an APP support. Another requirement to determine a product's grain contribution, the PFS must include portion size of a product as purchased. Exhibit A or bread grain chart, actual weight of the finished product as purchased, or based on the grams of creditable grain component per portion. To determine the fruit and vegetable portion, the PFS must include ounces of creditable ingredient per portion, the food buying guide yield information, and identify vegetable subgroups if applicable, currently only under the National School Lunch Meal Pattern. The next few slides will provide examples on how to review and verify the contribution statement on a PFS. To begin, let's review a PFS for a grilled chicken nugget. The contribution stated on the manufacturer's PFS is 4 chicken nuggets provide 2-ounce equivalent meat. Now we will need to verify the PFS using all the information included on the product label and on the PFS to determine if that contribution statement is correct. First, we need to decide if the PFS lists the creditable ingredient. Yes, ground chicken. Does the creditable ingredient match or have a similar description as the ingredient listed on the product label and listed in the food buying guide? Yes, the vendor identifies the chicken meat listed on the label as ground chicken, which matches a food description listed in the food buying guide. Does the PFS include the amount of raw chicken per portion? Yes, 2.88 ounces. Is the food buying guide yield information provided? Yes, 70%. We have all the information needed to determine if the contribution statement is correct. The next example is a beef patty with APP. The PFS. Remember, the APP supporting documentation. Now that we have verified the APP supporting documentation, let's continue with the PFS review. Does the PFS include the raw amount of ground beef per portion? Yes, 2 ounces. Does the PFS include the food buying guide yield for ground beef not more than 30% fat? Yes, 70%. All the required information is provided to calculate the creditable amount of ground beef. Does the PFS include information to determine the APP contribution? The answer is yes. The amount of dried APP portion is provided 0.2 ounces, and the protein as is 65%, which is also included. Please note the protein as is will be documented on the APP documentation as seen in the next slide. According to the supporting documentation, the soy protein concentrate is therefore the creditable amount of the APP is 0.72 ounces. Next, add column A and column B, and then round down to the nearest quarter ounce, which rounds down to 2 ounce equivalent meat alternate. Therefore, the PFS contribution statement for this item is correct. As a reminder, here are some key concepts. A PFS must be the most current. A new PFS must be filed. We know this is a lot of information to digest. Thank you for participating in the manufacturer's product formulation. And here are some resources that are available for sponsors. We greatly appreciate the work you do to fuel Oregon's